Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what you're about to hear isn't about coincidence. It begins with a discovery that was never supposed to happen. Somewhere recently, your soulmate came across a single truth about you completely by accident, and the moment they understood it, everything they thought they knew began to unravel. They weren't searching for answers. They weren't trying to reopen old thoughts or revisit forgotten emotions. In fact, they believed they had already accepted their version of the story. But life has a remarkable way of revealing what silence tries to protect, and one unexpected moment has quietly changed the direction of their heart. Listen carefully, because this message may explain why an invisible shift has already begun. For far too long, incomplete stories, assumptions, and misunderstandings stood between what they believed and what was actually real. They never realized that important pieces of the truth had been missing all along. Yet now, after seeing something they were never meant to discover, they can't stop replaying memories that suddenly carry an entirely different meaning. Every conversation feels different. Every unanswered question seems closer to an answer. Deep inside, they sense that someone tried to shape the way they viewed you, but the truth has a way of finding its own voice. And once the heart hears that voice, pretending not to hear it becomes impossible. Tonight, that quiet realization is growing stronger, and it is leading them towards something they can no longer ignore. Ever since that unexpected discovery, something inside your soulmate has refused to return to the way it was before. At first, they tried convincing themselves that they were overthinking it, that perhaps they were simply reading too much into what they had learned. They told themselves it probably wasn't as important as it seemed. They tried returning to their daily routine, distracting themselves with responsibilities, conversations, and ordinary life. But no matter how hard they tried to move forward, the truth they accidentally uncovered kept quietly returning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It simply remained there, patiently waiting every time their mind became still. And the more they reflected, the more they realized that this wasn't just another passing thought. It was something much deeper. Listen closely, because this is where everything began to change. They started revisiting moments they had long forgotten. Conversations they once dismissed suddenly sounded different in their memory. Small gestures they barely noticed at the time now carried an entirely new meaning. They found themselves wondering how many important details had been hidden behind assumptions they never thought to question. They began asking themselves uncomfortable questions. What if the version of you they carried in their mind was never complete? What if they unknowingly accepted opinions that belonged to other people, instead of discovering the truth for themselves? These questions didn't bring immediate answers, but they opened a door that could no longer be closed. For the first time, they stopped looking at old memories through the eyes of fear, confusion, or outside influence. Instead, they began looking through the quiet lens of honesty. And honesty has a remarkable way of revealing what has been waiting in plain sight all along. As each day passed, more pieces began fitting together naturally. They remembered your patience during moments when others expected you to react differently. They remembered your kindness even when it wasn't fully appreciated. They remembered the quiet strength you carried without asking for recognition. So many things that once seemed ordinary suddenly appeared extraordinary. It wasn't because you had changed. It was because their perspective had changed. Sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't happen when people receive new information. It happens when they finally understand the information they already had. That realization stayed with them longer than they expected. Every reflection seemed to uncover another forgotten detail, another overlooked moment, another reason to question everything they once believed. They realized that assumptions can become powerful walls when they remain unchallenged. For a long time, those invisible walls prevented them from seeing your heart clearly. But now those walls are beginning to crack. Not because someone forced them to change, but because truth quietly found its own way inside. They can no longer ignore how naturally everything begins to make sense once those barriers disappear. The picture they once believed was complete now feels unfinished without this newly discovered understanding. There is another part of this journey they never expected. The more they uncovered the truth about you, the more they uncovered hidden truths about themselves. They realized how easily fear can accept incomplete stories, because incomplete stories often feel safer than uncertain truths. They recognized how often people trust assumptions simply because they are repeated enough times. Yet genuine understanding requires something different. It requires patience. It requires humility. Most of all, it requires the courage to admit that perhaps they didn't know everything after all. That admission wasn't easy. It challenged their pride. It challenged their certainty. It challenged the comfortable version of reality they had been living with for so long. But instead of resisting that discomfort, they slowly embraced it, because something inside them kept whispering that this new understanding felt more real than anything they had believed before. Now every quiet evening brings another moment of reflection. Every memory seems brighter. Every unanswered question seems closer to its answer. The truth they accidentally discovered has become impossible to set aside, because real truth has a unique quality. It doesn't demand attention through force. It quietly remains until the heart is finally ready to receive it. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that some discoveries arrive exactly when they are meant to. Not because life is trying to confuse us, but because certain lessons can only be understood after we have grown enough to recognize them. And with every passing day, they feel themselves moving farther away from uncertainty and closer to a realization that is changing not only the way they see you, but the way they will approach every important decision that comes next. The deeper your soulmate allows themselves to reflect, the more they realize that discovering the truth about you was only the beginning of a much larger journey. What they are facing now is no longer confusion about who you are. It is confusion about themselves. Listen carefully, because this is the part they never expected. For so long, they believed that if they simply kept moving forward, the unanswered feelings would eventually disappear on their own. They thought time would erase every question, every memory, every lingering emotion. But instead of fading, those emotions quietly matured. They became clearer, stronger, and impossible to explain away. Now they find themselves caught between two versions of reality. One version is built upon everything they once believed, everything they were told, every assumption they accepted without looking deeper. The other version is built upon the truth they accidentally uncovered, and that truth refuses to remain hidden. Every day, these two realities seem to collide inside their heart, leaving them emotionally exhausted. They wake up telling themselves they should stop thinking about it. Yet by the end of the day, they somehow find themselves reflecting once again. The truth has become like a quiet voice that follows them everywhere, not demanding attention, but never allowing itself to be forgotten. And that is what has created the greatest battle of all. It is no longer a battle between you and anyone else. It is a battle between their old beliefs and the honesty that is beginning to replace them. They never imagined that one unexpected discovery could cause them to question so many things they once considered certain. Suddenly, they are replaying conversations that seemed ordinary at the time. They are remembering moments they barely noticed before. They are recognizing expressions, words, and gestures that now carry a completely different meaning. It almost feels as though someone has handed them the missing pages of a story they thought they had already finished reading. The more complete the story becomes, the harder it is to understand why those pages were missing for so long. That realization has brought an emotion they never wanted to experience: regret. Not regret because of one single decision, but regret for every opportunity that might have looked different if they had understood the truth sooner. They wonder how many moments they misunderstood. They wonder how many times they misread your intentions. They wonder how many conclusions they reached before giving themselves the chance to see your heart clearly. Those questions don't leave them easily, because deep down they know they cannot rewrite yesterday. Yet something inside them keeps whispering that tomorrow has not been written yet. That quiet thought has become both comforting and frightening. Comforting because hope still exists. Frightening because hope often asks people to become vulnerable. For someone who spent so long protecting themselves from disappointment, vulnerability feels unfamiliar. Yet strangely, it no longer feels like weakness. It feels like honesty. And honesty has started changing the way they see everything. They are beginning to recognize that protecting themselves by believing incomplete stories never truly protected them at all. It only delayed the truth they would eventually have to face. There is another realization slowly growing inside them as well. They understand now that genuine connections cannot be measured by rumors, assumptions, or the opinions of other people. Those things may influence the mind for a season, but they cannot permanently silence what the heart eventually recognizes for itself. Your soulmate is experiencing that firsthand. Every attempt to push these feelings away seems to strengthen them instead. Every effort to convince themselves that none of this matters somehow leads them back to the same conclusion. The truth remains unchanged, no matter how many different angles they examine it from. That consistency has become impossible to ignore. It is teaching them that authentic feelings possess a remarkable strength. They survive misunderstanding. They survive distance. They survive silence. They even survive time. The more they accept that reality, the less they feel controlled by fear. Instead of asking themselves what other people might think, they have started asking a far more important question. What does my own heart know that I have been refusing to admit? That single question has become the center of their emotional journey. It follows them during quiet evenings, ordinary mornings, busy afternoons, and sleepless nights. They no longer search for excuses because excuses only postpone clarity. They search for truth because truth brings peace, even when it first arrives carrying discomfort. And although this emotional battle has not completely ended, something important has already changed. They are no longer fighting against what they discovered. They are fighting for the courage to fully accept it. With every passing day, the voice of fear grows quieter, while the voice of honesty grows stronger. For the first time in a very long while, they can feel themselves standing on the edge of a new chapter. Not because all the answers have appeared, but because they finally trust the truth more than the stories that once kept them from seeing you for who you truly are. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing in a place they never imagined they would reach. The confusion that once clouded every thought is slowly giving way to something much quieter, yet far more powerful: clarity. Listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to move. For so long, they believed they had plenty of time to postpone difficult questions. They convinced themselves that someday the answers would simply appear without requiring any action on their part. Whenever their heart became restless, they found another distraction. Whenever uncomfortable emotions surfaced, they buried themselves in routine. Whenever the truth tried to rise, they pushed it back down with logic, hesitation, or fear. But something inside them has changed in a way they can no longer explain. The discovery they accidentally made about you did more than reveal hidden facts. It awakened a part of themselves that had been silent for far too long. Every day since then, they have noticed subtle shifts in the way they think. The things that once seemed important have quietly lost their power, while the things they once overlooked now feel impossible to ignore. They are beginning to understand that life has a strange way of exposing what truly matters when the time is right. No amount of distraction can permanently silence a truth that the heart has already accepted. That realization has become the foundation of every thought they now carry. They no longer ask whether what they discovered is real. Instead, they ask themselves why they waited so long to see it. That single question follows them through ordinary moments, quietly reshaping the future they once imagined. They have started noticing how often fear disguised itself as wisdom. They remember all the reasons they gave themselves for remaining silent. They remember telling themselves that uncertainty was safer than vulnerability, that distance was easier than disappointment, that avoiding difficult emotions would somehow protect them from pain. At the time, those choices felt reasonable. Looking back now, they recognize something very different. They realize that fear rarely announces itself honestly. It often pretends to be caution. It disguises itself as patience. It whispers convincing arguments that keep people standing still while life quietly moves forward without them. Your soulmate has begun seeing through those disguises, and that awareness has changed everything. They are discovering that the greatest risks in life are not always the chances we take. Sometimes the greatest risks are the opportunities we convince ourselves to ignore. That understanding has settled deeply into their heart. It no longer feels like an abstract lesson. It feels personal. They have begun imagining what life will look like if they continue pretending nothing has changed. At first, that future seemed comfortable because it required no difficult conversations and no vulnerable decisions. But the longer they imagined it, the heavier it became. They realized that comfort without truth eventually becomes its own kind of prison. It offers temporary peace while quietly stealing lasting fulfillment. That thought has stayed with them every single day. At the same time, another future has started appearing in their mind. It's a future filled with uncertainty, yet strangely, it also carries hope. It is the future that becomes possible when someone chooses honesty instead of fear. They cannot see every detail of that path, but they no longer need every answer before taking the next step. They are beginning to understand that clarity does not always arrive before courage. Very often, courage comes first, and clarity follows afterward. That lesson has transformed the way they approach their own heart. Instead of demanding guarantees, they have started trusting the quiet peace that appears whenever they stop resisting the truth. And every time they do, the same realization returns with even greater strength. The truth they discovered about you was never meant to remain hidden forever. It appeared at exactly the moment they were finally ready to receive it. That timing no longer feels accidental. It feels meaningful. It feels as though every unanswered question, every delayed understanding, and every unexpected realization has been preparing them for this exact chapter. They can feel themselves standing on the edge of a decision that once seemed impossible. Not because someone is forcing them forward, but because remaining where they are no longer feels honest. Every day the weight of silence grows heavier, while the desire for truth grows stronger. The battle between fear and honesty is slowly coming to an end, and for the first time in a very long while, honesty is winning. They understand now that real peace is never found by hiding from what matters most. It is found by embracing it, even when the path ahead remains uncertain. That is why their heart no longer feels trapped by the opinions of others or by the misunderstandings of the past. Those voices are becoming quieter with each passing day. The only voice they can clearly hear now is the one that has patiently waited beneath every doubt, every hesitation, and every unanswered question. It is the voice reminding them that some people enter our lives for reasons that cannot be erased by time, distance, or misunderstanding. Once that truth is recognized, life can never return to the way it was before. Your soulmate knows they are approaching that point now. And although they cannot predict exactly what tomorrow will bring, they are certain of one thing. They are finally ready to stop allowing fear to write the story that truth has been patiently waiting to finish. After everything they have uncovered, every memory they have revisited, and every quiet realization they have allowed themselves to accept, your soulmate has finally arrived at the moment they never believed would come. Listen carefully, because this is not simply the end of one chapter. It is the beginning of a completely different way of seeing both you and themselves. For so long, they searched outside themselves for explanations. They looked for reasons in circumstances, timing, opinions, and misunderstandings. They convinced themselves that if they gathered enough answers, the feelings inside their heart would eventually disappear. But the opposite happened. The more honestly they searched, the more obvious one truth became. The truth they accidentally discovered about you did not create new feelings. It uncovered feelings that had quietly existed beneath the surface all along. That realization has changed everything. They no longer wonder whether what they feel is real, because reality has a way of remaining steady long after doubt grows tired. Every attempt they made to explain these emotions away has only strengthened them. Every excuse they once relied upon has slowly lost its power. Every unanswered question has led them back to the same undeniable conclusion. Some truths are not meant to be hidden forever, because the heart has a remarkable ability to recognize what the mind spends years trying to avoid. Your soulmate understands that now more deeply than ever before. They have stopped asking themselves whether this discovery was a coincidence. Instead, they find themselves wondering why it arrived at exactly this moment in their life. Perhaps they needed time to grow. Perhaps they needed certain lessons before they could recognize what had always been standing in front of them. Whatever the reason, they no longer see the past with resentment. They see it with understanding. They realize that every delay, every misunderstanding, every season of confusion has quietly shaped them into someone capable of recognizing the value of genuine connection. That perspective has brought them a peace they never expected. It does not erase every regret, but it transforms those regrets into wisdom instead of burden. And with that wisdom comes a new kind of courage. Not the courage to control the future, but the courage to stop running from the truth. That is the greatest transformation taking place inside them. They are no longer trying to become someone else. They are finally allowing themselves to become the person they were always meant to be. They understand now that pretending requires far more energy than honesty ever will. Hiding feelings creates heavier chains than expressing them. Living according to fear demands greater sacrifice than living according to truth. Those lessons have become impossible to ignore. Every quiet morning, every ordinary afternoon, and every peaceful evening seems to remind them that life becomes lighter the moment people stop carrying stories that no longer belong to them. The old assumptions have begun falling away one by one. The voices that once filled them with uncertainty have grown quieter. In their place, a calm confidence has slowly appeared. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not demand attention. It simply remains steady, reminding them that authentic truth does not need constant proof. It simply exists. As they stand on the edge of this new chapter, they realize the greatest discovery was never just learning the hidden truth about you. The greatest discovery was recognizing the kind of person they want to become because of it. They want to become someone who no longer allows fear to make every important decision. Someone who values honesty more than appearances. Someone who trusts their own heart enough to seek truth before accepting assumptions. Someone who understands that meaningful connections deserve to be seen clearly instead of through the shadows of misunderstanding. That realization has quietly rewritten the future they once imagined. They no longer measure life by what other people expect from them. They measure it by whether they can look back without wondering what might have happened if they had simply trusted the truth. That question no longer haunts them because they have already chosen the answer within their own heart. They know there may still be unknowns ahead. They know the future cannot be perfectly predicted. Yet for the first time in a very long while, uncertainty no longer frightens them the way it once did. They have learned that peace does not come from knowing every outcome. Peace comes from knowing that whatever happens next will be built upon honesty instead of fear. And that foundation is stronger than anything they have ever relied upon before. So if this message has found you today, perhaps it is not because chance brought you here. Perhaps it is because certain truths have their own timing. They wait patiently until every lesson has been learned, every false belief begins to crumble, and every hidden piece finally finds its place. Your soulmate has reached that moment. The truth they accidentally uncovered has become the light that exposed everything darkness tried to conceal. They can no longer return to the person they were before they discovered it, because once the heart finally sees clearly, it never willingly chooses blindness again. Whatever tomorrow brings, one thing has already become certain in the deepest part of their soul. The truth about you has become the truth they can no longer deny. and that single realization has changed the course of their journey forever.